Hi, my name is Jason Copes. I'm a student at Oral Roberts. Today, in our business ethics class under Professor Pittman, will be discussing our Week 4 project. I'll specifically be looking at case 7.1, titled Hazardous Homes in Herculaneum. As we begin to look at Week 4 and discuss environmental ethics, we understand that it is a branch of applied philosophy that studies the conceptual foundations of environmental values, as well as more concrete issues surrounding societal attitudes, actions, and policies to protect and sustain biodiversity and ecological systems. An overview of the case: we understand that Herculaneum is a small town in the state of Missouri. Today's case consists of a company named Doe Run who smelters lead and has caused mass pollution and health hazards. Due to the high levels of lead poisoning, Doe Run has agreed to clean up the site and install new pollution controlling devices to prevent further pollution. The state of Missouri has notified the residents of the dangers and advised the people to stay inside and even change their diets. The residents' response is to urge the federal government to step in. However, the Environmental Protection Agency maintained that adding Herculaneum to the long list of places seeking a Superfund buyout would only delay the solution. And so, we have to start identifying the values and defining attitudes that have contributed to the pollution problems in Herculaneum, as they will provide us the reason that Herculaneum is in the environmental condition. According to the case, in 2010, the company Doe Run announced plans to introduce a new proprietary technology that would greatly reduce sulfur dioxide and lead emissions. In the end, though, Doe Run decided that doing so would not be financially viable in the current business climate and closed the smelter altogether on December the 31st, 2013. Besides the loss of jobs, the closure would have other lasting effects on the community. It had helped build a fire station and spent $6 million on a bridge. And a school superintendent, Stan Stratton, quoted, "There were negatives with the smelter, but they were always good partners." You see, is these type of attitudes that are willing to look at the cost estimate rather than the environmental justice, who allowed for this ecological impact to take place, these hazardous waste and the pollution. And so the question becomes, who's responsible? Do individuals inside the company now or in the past bear responsibility for causing the environmental damage at Herculaneum, or is it only the company as a whole? Is that responsibility shared by anyone outside the company? And should families who moved to Herculaneum have known better? Individual or company responsibility shapes the impact of those even outside of the company. And the cost of this pollution control can not only be measured through cost benefit analysis, but we must also look at the ecological economics. And therefore, we begin to understand that everyone who's involved should bear the responsibility. And if everyone who's involved begins to understand that everyone loses in these situations. The town of Herculaneum lost jobs of over 300 employees, lost over 700 family homes, lost local tax income of $500,000 annually, lost over an estimated $10 million of investment. And so who should pay the cost of cleaning up Herculaneum? The company, the town, the state of Missouri, the federal government? In general, whose responsibility is it to clean up the country's hazardous pollution sites and waste dumps? It's the question of moral reparations. Who is required to help the families living in Herculaneum? And how does a town in this condition move forward? Who should pay the cost? Two popular answers to this question circulate. One is those responsible for causing the pollution ought to pay. And another is those who stand to benefit from protection and restoration should pick up the tab. Still, the point is that we must develop a fair and just program for assigning the cost, knowing that we all bear responsibility for our environmental problems and that we all would benefit from repairing our environment. Is it about economics or environment? Was either the government or Doe Run morally required to buy the contaminated homes? Should anything else be done for those families? What, if anything, should be done for the town? Is Herculaneum better off without smelter, or should environmental standards have been waived to save jobs? Should we base our reasoning on the economics or the environment? This question has to be answered. Herculaneum is better off without smelter because the environment had been reduced to such injustice, to such hazardous waste, that the environment had become toxic to human beings. Human beings were no longer safe there, and therefore saving the jobs in the long run. A libertarian approach, John Stuart Mill, would say that we must focus on the long run, that we must be willing to invest in the technology needed to gain compliance with environmental standards, that the profit motives should not have been on the initial profit, but rather on the long run. And so, is it fair for Superfund to fine polluters for dumping or polluting that was that was actually legal at the time it occurred? Is it fair that each individual polluter have full liability for cleaning up environmental damage to which others also may have contributed? And how might Superfund be made to work better? When it comes to diving deeper into these environmental ethical questions, we must begin to consider our obligations to future generations. When we talk meaningfully of future generations, we have to talk about them having a right that we not despoil the world that they will inherit. That we must look forward to the future with their rights in mind. And so, yes, it's fair for Superfund to fine the polluters for dumping or polluting, although it was legal at the time it occurred, because we all must bear this responsibility. It is fair that each individual polluter have full liability for cleaning up environmental damage to which others also may have contributed. And the Superfund can be made to work better through expansion. Expansion from taxing those who are wealthier in order to save tomorrow. That we must continue to invest now so that we can save our future. Therefore, if fairness is a part of the question of justice, then environmentally, it is fair for Superfund to fine polluters for dumping and polluting, even though that was legal at the time. It is fair for each individual polluter to have full liability to help clean up. And Superfund must continue to be expanded in order to improve our society. There are not only these fair obligations, but there are individual obligations that individual manufacturers have to take on their obligations to future generations. That we must, with regard to pollution in general and the disposal of toxic waste in particular, must understand that our obligations to future generations must take a hold of their rights. And even though we still do not know exactly what those rights are or how they are to be balanced against the interests and rights of present people, that if we want to give them the best future, we must accept in our moral reasoning that we individually have a responsibility, but also as a society have an obligation to help sustain an environment through our ecological relationship with it that will be conducive for our kids, our children, the future generations to have a world that they too can live in. Our most pressing environmental problems include hazardous waste, land appropriation, resource extraction, and climate change. And businesses should address these issues with large investments to protect future generations from the results of their free resource attitudes. Companies can expand towards being truly green to combat situations like Doe Run Company's pollution. And we should continue to reassess repeatedly, constantly, our moral convictions as a society. Thank you so much. God bless you.